I have to first get into it with you because I was going back and looking at how you started and listening to podcasts and digging up various interviews and stuff. And I am like beyond blown away with all the many hats that you wear and have worn. So you have to fill me in on how this all came about, and starting from like Broadway to tech to now climate change. Like you have to I'm so curious about this adventure.
Well, it would take like 50 years, but yeah. So I was a musical theater nut from when I was a kid, and so I was a music major.
You have a favorite musical?
A favorite musical?
Yeah,
I'm a Sondheim nut. So the first show I ever saw was Sweeney Todd on Broadway, and blew my mind. So big Sondheim fan and big Les Mis fan. Also, we keep the score on our piano here at the house, and the kids and I always walk by and just play whatever's open.
I feel like On My Own was like the go-to song during auditions as a kid, and
you are so right.
Every time, but like it was like the go-to. I always wanted to be Colette, and just sadly I do not. I am so like out of two. I have absolutely zero like I'm terrible. Anyways, but so Sondheim, Les Mis, Broadway fan, and then
yeah. So I then after college I moved to New York and I became a Broadway conductor. My idea was to write shows, to write musicals. All through this time I was writing shows, but because it was very hard to break in, I thought I would just do the pit conducting thing in the meantime. So I did that for 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
And boy, the number of Cosette On My Owns that I heard at auditions, you are so right. I mean, like everyone used that song.
The go-to. Yes, Cosette. Sorry, I called her incorrectly Colette, but yes, it was.
It's been a while.
Now my daughter's singing it too, so it's.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it gets even better. I'm like, oh God.
So yeah, and then the transition to tech was really strange. There was this software program that came out for the Mac called Finale that let you just play on your keyboard and it would write out what you were playing. And it was $1,000 and I couldn't afford it. So I decided that I would write to the company and say, I'm a reviewer. Send me a review copy for free and I will write about it for our computer newsletter, our computer club newsletter, which I did and they did. And I'm like, that was easy. So I started like getting free software for years by writing about them for our newsletter. And that's how I became a tech writer. And then I did the New York Times for 13 years, writing a weekly column, a tech column. And then because of the Times thing, I got involved with CBS Sunday Morning, which is this show on CBS on Sunday morning. And that sort of drifted. Oh, and then I started hosting shows for Nova, the science show on PBS. And that's where it sort of tech drifted into science. And here we are.
That's amazing. Well, and I love that, because I was listening to a podcast and you were talking about not being able to afford the software and doing the reviews. And I love this idea of having a problem and finding a solution and being resourceful. And that's also exactly what you're doing with this book that you just wrote, How to Prepare for Climate Change, which is a total doozy. I'm just going to hold it up because I'm so impressed by this book. It's amazing. You broke this all down and are taking a problem and creating solutions with it in bite-sized snackable pieces that really, I was a little nervous, to be honest, to delve into it. And I have to say, like from the get-go, it was a very awesome, easy to access read. So bravo to you and kudos to you, because I think it's a fantastic solution. What was, for you, like, what was the start of that? Like, I know you're saying you got into science and you're obviously into tech. What was the start and why did you feel like it was so important to write this book?
Great question. And by the way, I'm sure your fans know this, but Jen is not just someone who shows up on these videos and has a list of questions that somebody wrote for her. She knows the stuff. She could talk. You could give your own talk on the climate crisis. I've also heard you on a few podcasts, and you are as informed and articulate as anyone I've seen. So
I appreciate that. Well, thank you.
It's
like chatting with people like you that I'm a sponge. I don't necessarily know, I'm at the surface, but it's by chatting with people like you that do all the homework that I'm like, oh gosh, I'll take that. I'll take it.
You should take it because you have the drive and you have the expression, the articulateness, and you know how to speak human. I interview a lot of scientists for a living, and it's they don't always speak humanese. So
well, but that's what you're doing with this, and you break it down. So thank you. But yes, and it's nice to chat with another human about something that's so crazy and so serious as the subject, and to do it in a way that is relatable.
Thank you. Well, anyway, so to answer your question, this all came from this quote by this guy, John Holdren. He was Barack Obama's chief science advisor. And he once had this great quote. He said, when it comes to the climate crisis, we have three ways to react. There's mitigation, which means lower your carbon footprint, try to stop it. There's adaptation, which means coping with what we've got. And there's suffering. How much we do of the first two will determine how much we do of the suffering. So what I found amazing is that there are so many books and articles and videos about mitigation, fly less and eat less red meat and get an electric car. And that's all super important. And we need to keep doing that. But absolutely nobody was talking about the second part, which is the adaptation. And so this book was everything that a person or a family can do to prepare. So where to live if you have a choice, how to build, what to grow in your garden, how to invest, how to insure, how to talk to your kids, everything. And then individual chapters on how to prepare for hurricanes and wildfires and floods and heat waves and ticks and mosquitoes and so on. So it's everything I could think of that lets you be more resilient in an era that is coming, in an era that is here, that's already hitting 25 million Americans every single year.
I love how-to. I don't love how-to books in terms of like, I'm not like one to jump on the bandwagon of like, try this spiritual adventure. I'm more of like, let's dissect this and help me understand like what that means. I like cookbooks that explain, like Amy Chaplin's I really love, because it's like, here is a salad, here are the ingredients, and you can kind of pick and choose your own adventure. And I feel like that's what your book is. It's like a pick and choose your life, like we're all in this, we're stuck with this situation. Let's pick and choose ways that we can be more adaptable with this climate crisis, because it's here. And I know a lot of people are going to wait until they start to suffer to start adapting to it. But hopefully people who start adapting now, the suffering will be a lot less and, not as painful.
You're so right, Jen. And by the way, my editor calls this the first uplifting book about climate change,
Yes.
Which is kind of hilarious. But the reason is tied into what you were saying, in that depression, including eco despair of all kinds, is not just feeling like your situation is terrible. It's that your situation is terrible and you can't do anything to change it. That's depression. And so the idea is, if you do things to take back control over your situation, including, making an emergency plan, making a go bag, reinforcing your roof, things like that. It's not just that you're making yourself more resilient when the disaster comes. It's also that you sleep better at night. You actually mentally feel better knowing that you've taken some steps to prepare. So yeah, so there's a stealth mission of the book too, which is the mental health aspect. You feel better knowing that you've done something about it.
And I love that you tackled that as well. And is it ecotherapy or psychiatry or psychology? I had never had thought of that at all. And I started a company called Town recently that was sort of dealing with that precisely, which was, I felt so defeatist when it came to climate change, because I felt like, well, what can I do? I'm one person and I can turn my lights off and I can buy things eco-friendly, but that's kind of like the mitigation part of it. And so I didn't know how to make those incremental changes at the time. And so, that's what's so great about this book, is that you really put it into these actionable, these actionable deeds that we can do and take charge of, which in turn helps me at least feel better about my day to day and moving forward. It's like, I remember taking a personal finance class in high school and feeling like so overwhelmed by it. But, having those things in place and preparing then led me to when, after college and moving on, suddenly it's all in place, because now it's in the works and you've done the homework. So that's what it really felt like for me, is just having a book that I could like plan my life with and feel better about myself and what I'm doing at the same time. So what was the process like for you delving into this? I can't imagine it was a quick sort of procedure, a quick deep dive.
No, it was not. Especially because when you think about it, I'm not an expert on anything in the book. I don't know anything about insurance or investments or growing gardens or anything. And in fact, not even really. I mean, I've done reporting on various, environmental stories for the CBS Sunday Morning show, but I wouldn't have called myself an expert on the climate crisis. So it was mainly a research job. So I interviewed all these 55 experts all over the world in these various subjects. And everybody was nobody gets paid for this. Everyone was very gracious and nobody cut me off. And just tons and tons and tons and tons of reading, like you. I try to be as spongy as you are, and then trying to shape it into, as you say, a how-to book. It's not. It's meant to be, like a field guide, like a how-to manual where you look up something and that's for you. I mean, if you don't live in wildfire country, which is, the western half of the country, then you don't need to read that chapter. So it's in that way, it's a dip in and dip out kind of book. And so it was, and I should mention, remember, this book was written during the Trump era, and it was when the government wasn't doing anything about the climate crisis. And in fact, as you may know, they had deleted the words climate change from all the government websites.
Right. I remember, and no one talked about it. And all of a sudden it was gone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I myself was feeling sort of depressed. So as you say, eco despair was my deal. And that's a huge issue in the country. The diagnoses of depression and anxiety are up something like 40% from 2016. So anyway, so for me, it was also an exercise in hope. And, fear of the unknown is the worst kind of fear, right? If there's a dark closet, that's scarier than a closet with the light on. And it's the same thing with this stuff. The more you know about the subject, the more you can get your brain around it and the less terrifying it is. So for me, it was also a helpful thing to sort of get my arms around it. Exactly.
So speaking of suffering, my family and I had to deal with the Texas freeze recently in February.
Oh, great. And, you're in Austin, aren't you?
Yes, we're in Austin.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So we've dealt, and I grew up in California. So until I was 13. So the wildfires weren't as bad then, but now watching my family and how they're dealing with the wildfires. One of my best friends, her family's home was destroyed in the Healdsburg fire. Another friend of mine who, dear friend, lived in Malibu, just moved out here. Her home was wiped right after she moved. I mean, it's wild. And, and the East Coasters who are, dealing with the hurricanes, what are your thoughts on these climate emergencies? I mean, they just seem to be getting more frequently, and I know that you've touched upon it in your book, but is this truly our new reality? And at what point are people going to accept that if it is, and do something about it? Like, what's your thought on that?
This is the new reality. We're not going to rewind to the weather in the 80s or the 90s. This is This is how it is for our lifetimes and our children's lifetimes. But you bring up a really interesting point when you mentioned the Texas freeze. I mean, my son was a software engineer in Austin, and
no way.
he's like, we don't have snow trucks, we don't have plows, we don't have salt trucks, we don't even have winter jackets.
Nothing. That was the problem, is that we were not able to adapt to this new way. Because like I moved from California to Idaho, and I consider myself a mountain girl, and I was like, let's get in the car, we'll go to the grocery store, we'll be fine. But we couldn't, the roads weren't plowed, there was no way to get ice or salt on the roads, and there were SUVs piled up everywhere because no one could adapt to, the city wasn't able to adjust.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So,
but I think what it shows is that, I mean, in the book, I make this argument that global warming is a terrible term. It confuses people. It makes people think that what we're worried about is, milder winters, yay, and the summers are a little hotter. Who cares? It's not that. It's nature is this complex domino series of systems, right? So it means freak heat waves, but it also means devastating snow snaps in Texas. It means devastating droughts followed by horrifying intense rains that flood us out. And it's all these secondary effects that you don't think about. I mean, smaller goats and more kidney stones and lower PSAT scores, more bar fights. These are all trickle down effects when everything starts going haywire. And more expensive chocolate, smaller beaches. I mean, sooner or later, one of these will hit you. So it's climate chaos. I've heard that term, or climate breakdown is probably a better term. Remember the Congress guy who walked in with a snowball into Congress a few years ago? He's like, you can't tell me the planet's warming.
Look, there's ice on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Clearly, he didn't quite understand. It's not global warming. It is climate chaos.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. It's really confusing, I think, to a lot of people, and it certainly needs to be discussed more, I think, in science at school, and not just that, hey, the polar caps are melting, but this is a whole system that's in place that creates a chaotic system that we're not used to.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. I know we were touching upon it a little bit before, but how that affects different communities. And I'm curious as to maybe if you can help explain why that is, and also why, in your opinion, is it such a political issue? Why is it so polarizing?
Yeah, that's something I put a lot of thought into. First of all, I learned in doing some other research, how there's like conservatives and liberals, that this is the same in every country of the world. There are usually two political parties. They may not have the same names, but they usually boil down to this. One group of people don't want change.
Yeah.
The other group of people wants change. Like, how could there be two sets of human species that believe so differently? It turns out, I mean, obviously it's where you grew up and what your family was like and what they believed, but they have actually done MRIs on conservatives and liberals. And the conservative brain actually has a larger amygdala. That's the fear organ of your brain. It's bigger than in liberals. So in a way, and we don't know which is the cause and which is the effect, by the way. We don't know if, like, because you're afraid all the time, your amygdala gets bigger, or whether it's because it's bigger, you're afraid all the time. But anyway, there are people who fundamentally fear change, and it's because it's fear of the unknown. And so that's part of it. That's why I learned in working on the book that you can't ever talk to a climate denier with facts and figures. That will only make them retrench and double down on what they believe. Yeah. So I think somebody explained it like this. You can't change somebody's mind of an opinion with facts and figures if that opinion wasn't formed by facts and figures in the first place. So if it's an emotional thing they believe, you have to speak emotionally. My kid can't sleep at night because he's so worried about the climate crisis. Or, my uncle in Nebraska, his fields were flooded last year. He didn't sell a single soybean or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. And also in the political world, as you know, money is a big deal. When politicians get millions of dollars for their reelection campaigns from gas companies,
right,
they're not going to vote against the gas companies.
Right. And it's also difficult now when they're investing in the sustainability, like the carbon dioxide, and trusting what's happening as well. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's right. The last chapter in the book, by the way, is, as you know, is called Where to Find Hope. And it's a bunch of promising signs that the world is kind of waking up. And of course, this book came out at the end of January. So it was written before Biden was elected as president. But, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, I think it's safe to say there's never been a president who cares as much about the climate crisis as this guy. $2 trillion plan to decarbonize and to do it fairly so that poor people don't get screwed over once again. And he's hired all the greatest climate scientists to surround him in every division of the government. So there's a lot of hope, not just for our country, but what we do is what the other countries look at. Like, China for 4 years has been like, why the heck should we decarbonize? US, you're the other big polluter. You're not doing anything. So, right. so it sends a signal, an important signal. So, so there's some hope.
It's one of those things that is it can be both good and bad, because on one hand, like, you have so many great resources in your book that you talk about, like, I forget if it's Red Cross but just apps that you can use to help see how your city's doing, or alarm you when there's, an emergency and you have to implement your go-to bag and get out of Dodge, or, survive on, water filtration systems. So they do obviously serve a positive purpose, but there are some times where it's just like, is this helping things or is this hurting things?
Yeah. By the way, I'm glad you mentioned that Red Cross app. It's called Emergency. It's free, and everybody watching and listening, I think, should download this app. It's the saddest thing when these disasters happen is when you hear about people dying in their homes, right, because they didn't find out. Like every year in California, when the wildfires come, people burn to death because they're older, they're not on social media, they aren't listening to the radio at that time, and they get trapped in their homes and they die, or in the hurricanes too. So what this Red Cross app does, you just put in your address, let's say your parents' address, grandparents, whatever, and then you can put it in a folder somewhere on your phone and forget about it. If any disaster ever starts heading that way toward one of those addresses, it starts beeping and gets your attention and gives you an early warning. It tracks 47 different kinds of disasters, and not just climate disasters, also chemical leaks and nuclear spills and all that stuff. And I mean, I see this thing, it has to save lives. It will have to work, because you're like, why is my phone, what? Wildfire?
There's a hurricane coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh God. And speaking of carbon offsets, personal consumerism. How did you research this book? Is there anything that you've learned that has radically changed your behaviors or your thoughts on combating climate change?
I've made a few changes, I have to say. I know this is absolutely no news to you guys, but it turns out that the red meat thing is way worse than I thought. One cow burps up 12 gallons of methane an hour. And methane, in case you don't know, is like carbon dioxide, but 80 times worse as a heat trapping gas. One cow, and there's 300 million of them.
Does that matter what they're eating though? Or
it does matter. And by the way, there are scientists frantically working to try to change the chemistry of what they're eating. Like it turns out if they eat seaweed, they burp less methane. Right. But it's a huge industry that will take, decades to change. But the resources these animals consume compared to chicken or pigs or especially, things you grow, vegetarian foods, is out of control. This I think stuck with me the most. 1/3 of the entire planet's land surface, not counting frozen areas, 1/3 is dedicated to cow grazing.
Really?
1/3 of the planet. And that is why they're burning down the forests in Brazil.
Right.
It's to make more land for their cows. So they're replacing a carbon sponge with a carbon producer, a methane producer. So I will honestly say I have not voluntarily consumed beef since I read that chapter. It's just not worth it. And by the way, I know, we're Americans, we eat beef. I get that, but it doesn't have to be 5 nights a week, and it doesn't have to be, what's for dinner. You don't have to describe the slab in the center of the plate surrounded by other things. You can think of the beef as the accessory, like a stir fry or pasta with, meatballs, or, it can be things where the beef is an ingredient instead of the ingredient. And it makes such a huge difference. I mean, man, if we could globally stop eating beef, and also you'll be healthier.
Totally. Well, you know what? I've actually really gotten into a deep dive with regenerative farming.
Wow, cool.
Have you been reading up on regenerative farming at all?
So when you say regenerative farming, you mean where the plant produces its own nitrogen, its own fertilizer?
That, but also with in order to have like a whole working system, you need to have animals like I mean, my friend does it, and so I've been sponging onto him, and I really got invest in it after watching Kiss the Ground.
Oh yes.
Which I love. I mean, I just love all that stuff. I geek out on it. But so my friends who I recently got to know started Epic Bar. They were vegans and were getting kind of sick, weren't finding the right nutrients, started Epic Bar, sold Epic Bar, and then started this ranch called Rome Ranch, and they raise bison actually, and they rotate. And the theory is that you need these giant animals to basically fertilize the land, to take this, they're at least bison are they have the perfect hooves that go into the soil, because you don't want to till the soil that releases all of the carbon dioxide or nitrogen or whatever. And so they have the hooves, and the hooves are like the perfect size to then have the seeds go in, and then they move them, and which they would have done on the plains. And then the cover crop grows, which you need, because you need that cover crop so that you don't have the runoff. So then the water seeps down and actually holds. And it's this whole cycle. And part of that cycle is the death of that animal, which, dies, and then we consume the meat, and then they actually leave parts of the animal on the ground that fertilize the ground, and other animals come and eat that, that scavengers and that sort of thing. But it just got me thinking about how to consume meat, because I don't eat a lot of meat, but when I do eat it, I'm going to be a lot more mindful about how and where that's from. And it's also tough because it is more expensive, as like organic. First of all, organic is kind of, it's up in the air as to whether or not that is a helpful term because you buy a chicken from Whole Foods and it's not organic but it's free roaming because they can't control the bugs that it's eating. So technically it is an organic animal, but because they can't completely 100% monitor, if it's eating a random butterfly or something. But so the term itself is kind of funky, but that's it's a more expensive way to consume things, but it's also healthier. And if you eat less of it, then it's kind of an investment. So it's a tangent, I digress, but it's something I'm like,
you see what I mean, you guys, about how much homework she's done? You see what I'm talking about?
Oh my God, I'm sorry. It's probably so boring. It's not
boring, it's cool.
I mean, love
what
it.
you described, the complete cycle of animal and plant life working together. I mean, that's fantastic.
But it's so important to understand. And I feel like we're so removed from the whole process. Everything's so stale. We don't eat enough dirt. Like half the food we consume and we eat doesn't have any dirt on it because it has pesticides. And, it all started with good intentions, but with that, then we lose all the nutrients and, trace minerals and things that we actually need that help our mental health, that help our guts. And I could go on and on and on, but regenerative farming is definitely something that it's fascinating and super cool. And part of that too is like at Rome, and I'm totally digressing and taking away from your story, but you actually watch the animal die and mourn the animal and grieve the animal. And it's a whole like spiritual sort of journey, because then you honor it and go like, I see with my own eyes this animal alive. I see that it's dying, and I'm going to make sure that I eat and consume every part, you know, so we ate the liver and the heart and all these things that normally you're like, oh my God, that's so gross. But being a part of that journey, then I don't know, it just got me back to this sort of natural carnal state that was kind of funky and cool.
It is kind of weird now that you mention it, that we don't see or know anything about the animals we're eating. Like if people could watch a slaughterhouse, I mean, you will never eat another cow or pig.
And that's the thing. But there are videos of it, you know, and they're shocking, but not everyone wants to see the shock, because you watch it and you go, I'll be a vegan after this one. That is terrible. But there's so many different temperatures of what goes down and how it goes down. And it's so important to do your homework and your research and on how to consume, how to invest. I love that you talk about how to invest. Speaking of that, you know, and breaking those things down and doing that research is just, it's important. It's nice. And it's nice that you, going back to your book, that you've done all that hard work for us. So again, thank you.
Yeah. I haven't written about that kind of farming. I did write quite a bit about the farmless farming, and they're big. So the idea here is you're growing plants in trays under artificial sunlight in buildings that can be multiple stories tall instead of on a farm. And the advantage is, number one, talk about farm to table. I mean, the restaurants can be within 3 blocks of where it's grown. There's no pesticides because there are no pests. You can control what's inside that building. You can grow much more efficiently because you control the weather, how much water they get, how much sunlight they get. And, you know, some of them are even grown without dirt. They're just, you know, hydroponically grown or aeroponically grown. And you can already buy it's mainly greens, you know, salad stuff and herbs and stuff like that. It's already available for sale, but it means that farms can be in cities. Farms can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be out in the Midwest.
Well, you know, even Target sells some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And for a while, you have a little Siamese fighting fish, and you can have some herbs growing out of it.
Yeah, it's such a cool concept. And the farming stuff is important because I believe it's 1/3 of all the emissions, the agricultural sector. It's like transportation is 1/3, you know, all the trucks and cars and planes. Manufacturing and industry is 1/3, all the factories. Farming and agriculture is another 1/3, and then there's everything else. So if we could make a difference there, it would make a big difference everywhere.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything that you really hope that people take away from your book? Like, is there?
I guess the main thing is I hope it introduces you to the idea of adapting and not just mitigating, because we need to do both. And so if you do nothing else, download that free app.
Emergency, right?
Yep, it's called Emergency. It's from the Red Cross. Look over your insurance policy, which is probably old and out of date and doesn't cover flooding, by the way. No homeowners insurance covers flooding, which is really on the rise. And the last thing is make a plan with your family. It turns out one thing all these disasters have in common is the cell network goes down, because cell towers are powered by electricity. When there's a power failure, we have no cell phones. So if your town is hit by a flood or a hurricane or a fire, and your family members are scattered, where will you meet if you can't use your phone? So make a plan now. Say, we'll meet at the library. We'll meet at the craggy tree across the street. Just make a plan. Put it in the Notes app on your phone so you'll remember it 3 years from now when all this goes down. So if you do just those 3 simple things, you're already way ahead of most Americans in being ready.
I am so appreciative. This is my jam. This is like just the highlight of my year so far. Like, this is just so cool. I'm so appreciative for you being here. And thank you to the readers who are here and watching. This book is fantastic. We are going to hit you up nonstop with this because I really feel like it should be on everyone's bedside table and be read with families in mind. It is superb. I so appreciate you putting it into layman's terms for people like myself. So,
well, thank you, Jen. I was just telling my wife last night, it's not fair that anyone has as many multiple talents as you do. And to be able to assume all this information as well. I mean, I swear you could give a talk on climate crisis right now.
Oh yeah, I'm so appreciative. I'm just so hungry and curious, and it's being able to just mooch off of people like you. So I so appreciate all the hard work you're doing so that I can take some credit for it. But no, I so appreciate it. And hi to your family, and congratulations again to your daughter. That is so cool.
Gish West for the win.
I love it. It's awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again. And please don't block me from your email.
I look forward to it. I'll reply to you right away.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks so much. This is so much fun.